Imagine this for a second. Someone you love dies, and there is no hospital to call, no priest, no cemetery, no coffin, no words like funeral or grief counseling or closure. There is just a body on the ground and a group of frightened humans staring at it, somewhere in a cold cave mouth or on an open plain with predators in the dark and the smell of death about to become everyone's problem. What do you do? Because for almost all of human history, this was not a philosophical question. It was immediate, practical, terrifying. A dead body is heavy. It rots. It attracts scavengers. It looks like the person you know, and yet very obviously is not that person anymore. And at some point, long before cities, long before kings, long before writing, humans started doing something strange with their dead. They didn't just leave them. They placed them, curled them, covered them, sometimes with tools, sometimes with ochre, sometimes with flowers maybe, sometimes with the kind of care you usually only give to the living. Why? Why would a species already struggling to survive spend precious time and energy digging a hole for someone who could no longer help hunt, gather, carry, fight, or reproduce? Why bury the dead when the living still needed everything? And the answer, like most important things in human history, is that it was never just one reason. It was survival. It was emotion. It was memory. It was fear. It was love. And somewhere inside all of that, it was the beginning of something so enormous that it may have helped turn a clever animal into a human mind. This goes deep. Start with the obvious reason, the one that sounds cold until you realize cold was exactly the point. Dead bodies are dangerous, not in a supernatural sense at first, in a brutally practical one. A body left near camp starts changing fast. The smell carries. Scavengers notice. Insects notice. Other predators notice. If you are a small group of early humans sleeping lightly, already trying not to get eaten, the last thing you want is a rotting body advertising your location to every hyena, wolf, big cat, and opportunist in the area. You don't need germ theory to understand that something has gone wrong. You just need eyes. You just need a nose. You just need to notice that when flesh sits out too long, bad things follow. So moving the dead away from camp, covering them, putting them into the ground, that solves multiple problems at once. It reduces the smell. It hides the body from scavengers. It creates distance between the living group and the physical reality of decay. It is sanitation before sanitation had a name. Risk management before anyone invented the phrase. Think about that. One of the earliest human rituals may have begun partly as trash control, except the trash was someone you loved. But if that were the whole story, early humans could have dragged bodies away and left them. They could have dumped them in ravines. They could have abandoned them to the landscape. That's not what some of them did. And this is where it gets strange, because the earliest clear burials we know about don't just show disposal. They show intention. Deliberate placement. Bodies laid in specific positions. Sometimes accompanied by pigment like red ochre. Sometimes with objects. Sometimes in ways that strongly suggest someone took the time to do more than solve a hygiene problem. They were not just removing death, they were staging it. Why stage death? Because humans were running into a cognitive problem that no other predator on the landscape had in quite the same way. We form attachments so deep that a dead body is not just meat to us. It is a contradiction. The face is still there, the hands are still there. The person is visibly present and completely absent at the same time. That is psychologically explosive. Your brain, built for social connection, keeps looking for someone who is no longer available to be found. A deer does not sit for hours wondering where the mind went. A wolf may react to death, may even linger, but humans appear to have crossed a line where death became not just an event, but a concept. We didn't merely notice that someone had stopped moving, we noticed that a self had disappeared. And once you can think that thought, everything changes. Burial becomes more than protection from smell and scavengers. It becomes a way to resolve the unbearable mismatch between body and person. You place the body somewhere because your mind needs a structure, a border, a before and after, a there, not here. The grave is not just for the dead, it is for the living brain trying not to break.
Now go deeper. Burial also seems to mark the moment when humans stopped seeing each other as purely biological individuals and started seeing each other as socially permanent beings. Not just a hunter, not just a mother, not just a child, a person with continuing significance even after death. That is a massive shift.
Because the second you treat the dead as still mattering, you create the idea that relationships outlive breath. You create ancestors, and ancestors are one of the most powerful inventions in human history. The moment your dead are not gone, but still somehow part of the group story, the group itself changes. It gains depth, it gains memory, it gains time. Now, you are not just a handful of living bodies trying to survive this winter. You are people who came from somewhere. People connected to those who came before. People with obligations backward and forward. Read that again. A grave is not just a hole in the ground. It is a machine for making lineage. That matters because lineage stabilizes groups. It strengthens identity. It tells children who they are. It tells communities why they belong together. It may even tell them why a place matters. This is another layer that often gets missed. Burials can anchor people to land. If your dead are buried here, then here is not random anymore. Here is home. Here is where your people are. Here is where memory lives in the ground. For mobile hunter-gatherers, place was often seasonal and flexible, but repeated burials can change that. They can turn geography into meaning. A valley stops being just a valley. It becomes where grandmother is buried, where the old hunter lies, where the child was placed. Suddenly, land is not just useful. It is sacred, historical, ours, and that may have had real survival value. People fight harder for meaningful places. They return to them. They organize around them. They remember them. But burial wasn't only about memory. It may also have been about control, because death is chaos. One day someone is talking, laughing, coughing, moving with the group, and then suddenly they are a body that does not respond. Early humans had no cardiology, no neurology, no neat medical language to wrap around that event. Death would have felt abrupt, disturbing, and in many cases, deeply mysterious. The world takes a person and gives back a corpse. That is the kind of thing that demands a response. Ritual is what humans do when reality becomes too large to handle raw, and burial is ritualized control over the most uncontrollable thing there is. You dig, you place, you cover, you mark, you repeat, you create sequence where there was shock, action where there was helplessness, form where there was terror. Even if the first burials were not fully religious in the later sense, they were already doing something religion does extremely well, giving the living a script when the mind is overwhelmed. That script matters. It helps grief move. It helps fear settle. It tells the group, we know what to do now. Now here's the part that really shifts the whole picture. Burial may also be one of the earliest signs that humans had started imagining invisible realities. Because the moment you place objects with the dead, pigment with the dead, food with the dead, ornaments with the dead, you are flirting with a wild possibility. Maybe death is not total erasure. Maybe the person goes somewhere. Maybe they still need something. Maybe what you see is not the whole story. Even if these ideas were vague, even if they varied wildly from group to group, the behavior suggests something extraordinary. Humans had begun to think beyond the visible, beyond immediate utility, beyond the brutal logic of survival in the present tense. That is not a small development. That is the beginning of symbolism reaching into mortality itself. And symbolism changes everything. Once you can imagine an unseen world, you can imagine spirits, ancestors, laws, futures, promises, gods, debts, meanings. Burial may not be the first symbolic act, but it is one of the clearest signs that symbolism had become emotionally unavoidable. Then, there is grief itself, which might sound soft until you realize grief is expensive. To grieve is to spend energy on someone who can no longer return the favor. To stop and mourn in a dangerous world is, in pure evolutionary terms, a costly thing to do. And yet humans kept doing costly social things because our species runs on relationships. A group that cares for its injured, remembers its dead, and protects its vulnerable is not being inefficient. It is building trust. If I know you will not abandon me when I become weak, I am more likely to cooperate with you while I am strong. Compassion scales, care compounds. A burial says something to everyone still alive. You matter even when you stop being useful. That is civilization in embryo, not agriculture, not walls, not bronze, not writing. The decision that a human life has value beyond immediate function. So, what was the real reason early humans started burying their dead? Because a body was dangerous, yes. Because scavengers were a problem, yes. Because camps had to stay clean and safe, yes. But also because humans had become the kind of animal that could not simply walk away. The kind of animal disturbed by absence. The kind of animal that makes meaning under pressure. The kind of animal that turns loss into ritual, ritual into memory, memory into identity, and identity into culture. Burial sits right at that intersection. Biology, emotion, practicality, symbolism, all fused into one act. A grave protects the camp. It protects the mind. It protects the group's story. And maybe that is the most astonishing part of all. The first burial was not just about death. It was about refusing to let death have the final word on what a person was. It said, in the most primitive possible way, this individual was not just a carcass. This was one of us. That sentence, even before language could fully say it, may have changed human history. So next time you pass a cemetery, or stand at a funeral, or feel that strange stillness that surrounds a grave, remember what you are looking at. Not just mourning, not just custom. You are looking at one of the oldest technologies of the human heart, a behavior built in terror, shaped by love, and refined across tens of thousands of years until it became one of the clearest signatures of what we are. We are the species that buries its dead because we cannot help doing two things at once. We face reality exactly as it is, and then we insist it must mean more than that.